I'm Emma Albright, and this is Paris Calling. Today, Gaspard Koenig, Paris, France.
I feel I can be extremely comfortable in a posh Parisian dinner and extremely comfortable in a farm, and not pretending to be what I'm not in both locations. Sometimes it's even disturbing, I don't really know what's my real environment because I feel like a chameleon.
Gaspard Koenig is a man of many hats. Philosopher, novelist, founder of the independent think tank GenerationLibre, candidate in France's 2022 presidential election, one of the country's most original public intellectuals, and even a one-time Hollywood actor. But when we caught up with him here in Paris, between long spells in the French countryside, there was nothing frantic about the self-described chameleon. Koenig, let it be said, is in his down-to-earth era, quite literally.
Most of the time now, I try to grow my roots in Normandy, where I bought a house 4 years ago. And it's a long story, but I have a horse there, so I had to make sure that we could meet each other as often as possible. And now I tend to say that I can live in Paris, but my habitat is in Normandy. You don't really have an habitat in such a big metropolis, because the notion of habitat means that you connect somehow with your environment and with your natural and social environment. I would start by distinguishing land and soil, because being attached to a land is probably something extremely regressive and extremely dangerous, on the verge of becoming nationalistic. Russia wants more land. They feel that some land should be French. That's what triggers wars, and the wars in human nature, owning land as a territory, as a frontier. But now if we think about soil, it's very different, because what's interesting in the soil is that it's such a living object. When you start looking at it, hundreds of millions of creatures. One estimates that in 1 spoon of soil, you can find 10 billion living beings, more than humans on the planet. And those living beings are scarcely known. We know about 1% of them. So it's a whole universe. And the function of the soil is to eat what's dead and to transform it into elements, ingredients that can nurture life once again. So it really transmutes death into life by eating things, in fact, as simply as that. Eating corpses and vegetables, eating branches and leaves that fall onto it. Things cannot change if they are not destroyed, because that destruction is a condition for something else to appear, for rejuvenation.
Far from his farm in Normandy, Koenig finds further proof near the South Pole.
I was talking with a glaciologist, and she mentioned to me that a very little known fact, which is actually not extremely appetizing, is that when the ice starts to go away in the summer, for 1 month about, you actually walk on the corpses of penguins. Because those corpses, they don't rot. And they don't rot because it's cold, but the main reason is because there is no soil. There is no soil, so there are no bacteria. So because they don't rot, they're stuck in a way in the same reality. So that soil is what makes possible progress on Earth and natural evolution. Tocqueville has very, very well analyzed that this desire always to change places is something that characterizes the democratic age, because people are in a way unsatisfied and they think they could have better somewhere else, could have it better somewhere else. So they're always looking for something, they're always excited and troubled. And so they never rest, they're never at peace with themselves.
Perhaps it was some of that restlessness back in 2020 that prompted Koenig, then 38, to set off with his mare, Destinada, to retrace French philosophers Michel de Montaigne's horseback journey from Bordeaux to Rome. Over 5 months and some 2,500 kilometers, he crossed France, Germany, and the Apennines into Italy, traveling light, sleeping in a tent, often relying on the hospitality of strangers. For Koenig, the slow rhythm of the ride was not just about the distance, but about testing Montaigne's ideas, rediscovering freedom through chance encounters, landscapes, and the patient pace of a horse. An experience he wrote about in his book, Our Wandering Freedom on Horseback in the Footsteps of Montaigne.
Je m'apprête à partir avec cette dame espagnole qui s'appelle Destinada. Desti, pour les intimes.
Ce qui va être intéressant, c'est de rencontrer les gens comme faisait Montaigne.
So I spent those 5 months on horseback and also alongside the horse, most of the time actually, traveling from Bordeaux to Rome, following Montaigne's footsteps. But the main reason for that particular journey was to see things differently, because I was not going very far. I was staying in very familiar countries, which I know quite well, especially obviously my own friends. But in that position on a horse or with a horse, what Montaigne always also says, you see things very, very differently, because a road becomes an insurmountable obstacle, because a bridge can be something fatal, and because people greet you in a very different way, and a much more generous way usually. So you find a very, in fact, exotic and unknown environment in the midst of your own society. But you have to find hay for the horse, you have to find a place or a bed for yourself, you have to find a vet, you have to find just an itinerary. So everything, that reality, that very familiar reality, appears from a very different angle.
These days, Koenig hasn't entirely climbed off the saddle. He still takes to the road when there's good reason. But his perspective has shifted. The journey now unfolds from a different angle, the garden. His latest book, Humus, blends philosophy with ecology, the first in a planned quartet of novels inspired by the 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire. From his hectare of land in Normandy, he reflects on soil, travel, freedom, and responsibility, not as abstract notions, but as lived experience.
Well, it's another way of traveling, actually. When you start paying attention to it, everything changes permanently. So you wake up in the morning and you're excited and curious to see what happened during the night. And in fact, you travel a lot because you see a lot of different things, because you relearn how to see things. You don't have to look for novelty in exotic places. You see novelty at your feet all day long, and that's really what's exciting when you start connecting with nature and what lives in it. But obviously in cities it's unless a shop opens or closes, but basically you're all the time in the same place, because our cities are built in order to eradicate the soil, and so to make sure things don't change, in fact, are immutable or eternal, and that's why they are boring. That gardening thing can be rather addictive to the point where you lose all ambition, which is not very good either. Montaigne is referring to a Roman emperor whose name escapes me now, and I think he's the only Roman emperor to have resigned from his position, and so he was growing his vegetables, his pumpkins, I think. And then people would ask him, why don't you return to Rome, and we need you, and you need to go back to power. And he responded that, well, you haven't seen my, who will take care of my pumpkins? I mean, that's very important. And I can see it's not a joke, because, you always feel responsible with life. People who have a cat, people who have a horse, or people who have a mouse or whatever, their life changes, because you really have to integrate that into everything you do. What will I do with the cat? When you grow vegetables, it's the same. What would I do with the pumpkin? It needs meat, it needs to be watered.
Freedom, of course, is never far from Gaspard Koenig's mind. The founder of France's GenerationLibre think tank, Koenig has spent years wrestling with the idea of liberté, its constraints, its obligations, and its meaning in the modern world. Still, Koenig hasn't always been so rooted in France.
And then I think that sentiment of freedom is something weird. I worked for almost 10 years on freedom and the definition of freedom and experiences of freedom. And our modernity tends to think freedom as negative freedom, which is freedom from everything, so you don't feel any obstacle. That's why you're free. And what you do with your freedom is moral judgment that has not to be addressed by political philosophy. It's a personal matter. That negative freedom means that maximum freedom is to be in an airport, to have an infinite money on your credit card, and to be able to go anywhere, to buy anything, to experience whatever you want, at whatever cost, and whenever you wish. And so you have an infinity of possibilities, of opportunities, as we say, in front of you, and that's where you're, maximally free. And that's been theorized by the thinkers of modernity, such as Benjamin Constant. Now I think it's that definition really misses the point. So for Benjamin Constant, that's the modern definition of freedom. That's the ancient freedom, meant to be part of a greater whole, be part of a society. But that was quite authoritarian. I'd say that our contemporary freedom, maybe eco-freedom, if you want, is to participate in a whole, in a greater order, but that order has to be spontaneous, meaning to feel part of a natural and social ecosystem in which you contribute, from which you take things in return, and you feel you contribute to build a spontaneous order. And that's where the sentiment of freedom, I feel, is really complete. So in an airport with all those opportunities, in fact, there's something wrong. Why do you feel free in a forest when you walk and you have very little way? You have very little choice. In fact, you just follow one way and you're not exercising your capacity to choose, but still you feel free into that sort of wilderness. And I think that sentiment of freedom is because you connect to something bigger, but you're part of it, right? You act in it. You have a role in it. And that's why in the countryside, when you try to be autonomous is a big word and it doesn't really work, but when you try to see what input and output you engineer into your environment, when you recycle things, when you customize things, when you tinker things, that really gives a sentiment of fulfillment, which I think has to be replicated on the social side in little communities able to self-regulate. It's the dream of the eco-anarchists, such as from Reclus to Bookchin, that societies should be organized on the model of ecosystems. But I can see how it contributes to that sentiment of freedom. The whole concept of designing bioregions, meaning areas that have a certain geological and agronomic consistency, and to base your social contract onto those regions, is to say that when you feel responsible for your environment, politically responsible, I mean, and when you have democratically the means to act on it, to deliberate, to vote, local regulations, then you would naturally take care of the natural world around you, because you will be responsible for it. So the idea is, we can't wait for people to become, eco-activists for the world to get better. In fact, we have to give them back the power on a local level in order to naturally incentivize them to become responsible for their environment and to behave in a good way. So let me take a very simple example. Where I live, if the field of the neighbor is full of chemicals, I don't care, because I buy my food in the bio-cup nearby, and maybe the food comes from hundreds of kilometers away, but it's healthy. I always take that bet that with responsibility grows rationality. It goes that way and not the other.
Still, Koenig hasn't always been so rooted in France. One of the more surprising lines on his resume, a stint in Hollywood, playing none other than Ted Kennedy in the 2016 Jackie Kennedy biopic, Jackie. Koenig brushes it off as a bit of serendipity and fun, preferring instead to recount other moments where he felt truly out of place.
What's wrong with you? You don't have to do this.
I will march with Jack.
Freeze, Ted!
Alone if necessary. I'm not the first lady anymore.
Apparently, I look like Ted Kennedy, so I was hired to be the lookalike of Ted Kennedy alongside Natalie Portman playing Jackie, and I just did it for 2 weeks. But my role consisted mainly into waiting and then crying because I was following the coffin of my dead brother. So it's obviously just another universe. But more recently, during those summer holidays, a French newspaper, Le Figaro, asked me to pick a place. They asked a number of writers to pick places where they would hate going on holidays. That's their worst nightmare, go on holidays there. And to try and go there for a couple of days. So I think it was a funny exercise just to think, what I really hate most. And I chose Saint-Tropez. And Saint-Tropez is that extremely fancy former fisher village in the south of France, where all the global jet set gathers from June to October, probably. So I went there to see for it was supposed to be 2 nights, but I only resisted 1 night. And there, frankly, that was exactly what I had imagined in wars, and I feel quite surprised that when you're so wealthy, you're still so gregarious. Obviously, you have shops, every very, very fancy, expensive shops at every corner. Not even very luxurious or refined. It's just very expensive, but it's not neither beautiful or made out of good material or anything. It's just expensive because it has to be in that place. And so that community of extremely rich people just colonized that small village And so they preserved it in a way because it's still, if you take out the people, it's still quite charming. I mean, they didn't destroy the architecture, but that makes it even more disturbing because something is really destroyed, but it's not like the buildings, which are, beautifully redone in general. But they destroyed the soul in a way.
So, adieu cities and bonjour countryside for good? Not quite. Koenig hasn't finished exploring the tension between the urban and the rural just yet. From the soil beneath our feet to the ruins of modernity, he keeps asking, how do we live and how do we belong?
Currently, what I do, I work more on a non-fiction, on the urbex, urban exploration. And what interested me is when you visit contemporary ruins, and people say, oh, nature is taking back its rights, and nature is going. But usually, that's it. The description stops there, and people laments on how human buildings are being dilapidated, and they say, well, there's a lot of vegetation, but that's it. What I'm interested in is how it grows, how, where, when, and how will that be destroyed? Exactly what plant, what root will destroy what material in how much time? I mean, concretely, when you say, nature takes over, how does it work really? And for our buildings, for our world of concrete and glass, how will it work? So what will our ruins look like in 200 years?
Paris Calling is a World Crunch podcast. Post-production is done by Anne-Sophie Goninet, interview by Bertrand Auger, and narration is by me, Emma Albright. Editing is by Jeff Israeli. Credit to Gaspard Koenig and Searchlight Pictures for audio used in this production. With each episode of Paris Calling, we discover someone else somewhere else. Support Paris Calling with likes, shares, and ratings on your favorite platforms.